I mean, look at LASIK surgery. The costs have come down and down and down and down. Why? Because it's competitive. So you need competition. So there are a lot of things like this that I'm convinced we can do to make insurance more reasonable. I think, by the way, another thing, if you have private insurance, that should be 100% deductible. That's another huge flaw in our healthcare system, not having private insurance be 100% deductible. I mean, what is this? Business provides it gets 100%. I mean, why not be equitable? So that's, I mean, it's not just one thing. There are probably 25 things like that can make health insurance, more affordable. But let me add another dimension here, because in fact, the doctors, the nurses, the rehabilitation therapists, and because I have been in the hospital and really appreciate the care I've had. I mean, there are a lot of people that have extraordinarily high quality employment that do a lot of good. And, we need to be appreciative, too, of the very meaningful employment that is there. Having people employed in worthwhile activity is not a bad thing. So I think we need to keep that in the balance, too. But you never improve something by having the government take it over. Right? I mean, good grief already.
Well, yeah, the reason I asked, too, is just where I did work before, a lot of people's wages were going up slower than their health insurance premium, so they were actually going backwards.
Right.
Because I just read an article in the paper where they were talking about the highest paid executives in Minnesota, and their pay went up 26%, but most average workers are just going up 2 to 3%, but then they're actually going backwards with the health insurance costs going up.
Yeah, yeah.
So
anyway, there's a lot we can do, but let me say one more thing about Obamacare. The last estimate I saw, and this came out of the U.S. House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, their research said Obamacare will add $2.6 trillion to the debt in the next 10 years. We don't have $2.6 trillion. I mean, we don't have anything. Since when can we spend money? We don't have. I mean, the party's over, guys. And I want you to know that a big part of my message to Southern Minnesota is the message. The party is over. We can't continue to spend money we don't have. Milton Friedman, I just saw a wonderful article on him, I think it was a Star Trib today, was the most explicit in saying there is no free lunch. I mean, somebody is going to pay. And too many of the politicians think, I mean, don't worry about it. Hey, somebody is going to pay. And at best, we're passing this on to our children. I mean, don't we want to pass, some assets on to our kids? Do we want to pass on to them this huge debt? I don't think so.
I realize we've got a very definite cash flow problem. What is the net worth of the United States? We own 69% on Alaska. We own the offshore oil. We own the Rocky Mountains. We own most of northern Minnesota.
Steve, it's way too much. I mean, why in heaven's name does the federal government need to own all this land? I don't see that. I don't see having over 800 military bases around the world. I think the day for that is over. I think there are a lot of things we don't need to spend money on. Now, let me give another example. In one of the area newspapers about 3 weeks ago, there was an article about a quote-unquote science project taking place north of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. $50 million, all federal spending, north of Grand Rapids, to study the effects of climate change on peat bogs. I think we could live without that. Okay? Study the effects of climate change on peat bogs. 50 million. And ladies and gentlemen, what's the agenda there? It's the agenda of the Greens, who want to get some kind of evidence that if the earth warms, it gives carbon dioxide off into the atmosphere, so we're all going to die. It's a political agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Agree with it or don't agree with it. It's a political agenda. And frankly, I don't see how we can afford to be spending $50 million on a political agenda. You know, if this was the only case like this in our country, it wouldn't be so bad. The problem is there are thousands of cases like this. So how do you control that? You do it by putting limits on how much you can spend, and then you have to prioritize. If you don't have the limits, you're nowhere. It's the same thing you do with your farming operation. It's the same thing you do with your businesses, with your homes, with the schools. I mean, this is how we run our affairs, with the exception of the federal government. Now, I have to give you just one more example, and I'd love to take another question. Some time ago, I'm in Rochester, Minnesota, and the area legislators are appearing before the Chamber of Commerce. And I get a chance to ask the question. I'm a guest there at the Chamber, and so I asked the legislators this question. The question was, what percentage of the GDP do you think is appropriate for state government spending? Okay, I'm a numbers guy all the time. So what percentage of the GDP do you think is appropriate for state government spending? Believe it or not, 2 of the legislators said, we don't worry about it. We just spend what we need to spend. You wonder why we've got problems. If I had a teenage son or daughter who said that, I would say, you're on your own, kiddo. I'm not giving you a credit card. Okay, I'm going to suggest 1 or 2 more questions. We've been here almost an hour, but it's up to you. 1 or 2 more? Yes?
I've got one.
Yes.
I work for a farm service agency, been there for over 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, over that 25 years, well, not so much the very first 10, 15, but since then, it's been like almost an explosion of programs.
Yes.
And
Right.
of course, no agency says no more. It's always more.
Always more.
We want more, we want more.
Yes.
The employees complain about it, but typically it comes down from Congress. We can't fund stuff ourselves.
Right. You just administer. Right.
So would your goal be to like make across the board cuts, reduce all spending, or is it going to be targeted more targeted?
Well, my position is we have to set the limit. This is the maximum we can spend for 2013. And then we debate on what's most important. And I think those debates are healthy. But then we debate what's most important with everything on the table. And I'm not nearly as concerned about how that debate ends up as I am about setting the limit. I mean, I can live with some disagreement. But, you know, what you're pointing out is exactly right. We haven't had any real constraints, and so it just gets bigger all the time, more programs all the time. And what's happening? We're putting more weight on the sled, and eventually the big diesel engine can't pull it. Okay, we have surpassed the point where the free enterprise system can be vibrant, healthy, expanding when we are up to 24%. And I'm convinced we have to get back to 18. And then we talk about which programs are less important. But until we set the limit, that conversation doesn't happen. For me, the peat bog study is a real easy target. I mean, greenhouses out in the peat bogs, that's what we've got. With probes in the ground to heat the peat. I mean, it's like a bad comic book. I'm going to suggest one more question, and then I think we'll break, and I'll be happy to stay and you know, talk to anyone privately. Anybody? Got a gentleman from the media here. I'm an open book.
Where do you think the federal government's going to come up with the money to pay all these indemnity payments if this drought continues? Crop insurance, that's going to be a big budget buster.
I think the peat bog project has to go.
The what?
I think the peat bog project has to go. I mean, I think when you have a priority for disaster relief, and I'm somebody who believes that there are times that we should give disaster relief, but that means we better cut some things that we don't need. It has to be priorities. We have to say the disaster relief is a higher priority than the peat bogs, for instance, and a bunch of other things. We can't just spend more. We can't do that. It doesn't work. There is no free lunch. As Milton Friedman said, that's not my language. It is. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I just would like to, just again stress, this is not difficult, but it's essential. And we don't have any choice. Okay? We don't have any choice. We have to balance the budget. It's not an option. And I'm really more a messenger than anything. What I'm doing is stating, the obvious. We have to balance the budget. Our back is to the wall. The party's over. We've been doing this too long, and we're paying the piper. And now's the time. And the question for you is whether you want to be personally committed as I am personally committed. Okay, I'm 67 years old. I don't need to work. I'm in wonderful health. I'm here for one reason. I'm totally committed. My life is dedicated to turning this around. It's the only reason I'm here. I want you to commit yourselves to turning this around. The good of our country, the good of our children, the good of our being a beacon light of freedom in the world depends on us turning this around.